In today's episode, the hillside gets some foliage, buildings and lights are installed, and the final touches are added to the layout. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, for the series finale of building a 009 layout inside a suitcase. Yes, today is the final episode, but there's still a lot to do, so strap in because this is going to be a big one. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by D-Rails and Scenic, and a big thank you to both of them for supporting the series and helping make this possible. And as always, I'll be talking about them both a little bit more later in the video. And now let's head over to Gofod Tynn, where I'm going to make a bit of a change to something. In the previous episode, the static grass was added to the hillside and around the track, and generally the layout is now looking a lot more finished. However, there is still one big area that I'm not happy with, and that is the platform surface. This yellow sawdust scatter that I put down earlier in the series really doesn't look that good in my opinion in comparison to the rest of the layout. It's far too colourful for my liking, and my original plan for this station was to have more of a gravel surface, so I'm going to make some big changes here. The first thing to do is add some coping stones along the edge of the platform. So I've made up these strips using Slater's plasticard paving slabs, which is what I've used for platform edges in the past. They've been painted grey with a black wash, and then a crisp white line has been added along the edge, and these should really look the part, so let's get them stuck to the platform. And this was easily done just using a bit of super glue along the underside. The strip can then be put down into place, and there's just enough time to make some small adjustment before the glue sets. And then I'm adding a shorter section here at the end of the platform for the ramp down to ground level. With a bit of extra glue added onto the ramp itself, the plastic card can then just be bent down into position thanks to it being so thin. Further along the platform, another strip is added using the same technique as the first one. And the joins are easily disguised here by cutting the plastic card between the paving slabs. That way, when you butt them up to each other, it looks continuous. Finally, the other ramp can be put into position too. And I used a pair of tweezers here just to hold the plastic card down to the platform surface while this sets, along with the glue bottle as well, just for a bit of extra weight. Now this edging is a really nice addition, but it's the platform surface that needs the most attention. So I'm going to put a layer of PVA glue all over this in preparation for the sawdust to be covered up. The sawdust may well act as a bit of a base layer though, although I'm not sure how much will actually show through. And with the majority of the platform covered, I'm now just going to use a smaller brush to fill in the gap up to the platform edge. For the new surface, I'm actually going to use the Scenic's pothole road kit again. You may remember a few episodes ago I used this for the surface in the yard, and I was so happy with the results I've decided to reuse it here. I want to switch things up a bit this time round though, so I'm going to use the lighter road ash powder to cover the majority of the surface. And this is going to give the platform a slight tonal and colour difference from the yard so it doesn't all look the same. And rather than using card or a lollipop stick to smooth this out, this time I'm just using my fingers to gently pat the powder down into the glue. I'm also using some of the grey road powder to blend this into the yard surface around the outer edge of the platform, just to fade the two surfaces together. I also used this powder along the platform too, just sprinkling a little in random spots, much like I did to create the potholes in the yard with the road ash. Again, I'm patting this down into the surface, and this gets it to blend nicely with the other powder that's already there. After that, I can just fill in any rough areas by sprinkling a little bit of extra powder. And any excess can easily be brushed away afterwards just to remove it from unwanted areas. And with it all done, I have to say I really like the effect this has given me. It's a much finer texture, and I have to admit I was quite worried about the station, but the Geoscenics powders have definitely saved me here. I don't know about you, but I really like the new surface to the platform. The Geoscenics powders have given it a really great texture and surface, and it's definitely much more of what I was originally aiming for. So I'm pleased to say that this episode is sponsored by Geoscenics, and I don't think you have to look very far to realise that I'm a big fan of their products. The pothole road kit that I used in the yard was great fun to work with, and it produced some fantastic results, and that's why I opted to use it again for the platform surface, and it just shows how versatile their products can be, that I was able to have a really nice distinction between the yard and the platform just by changing up what order I used the powders in. Now, if you like the results I got with the Geoscenics powders, well, I'm really pleased to say that they're offering you guys a discount on the pothole road kit, so I definitely recommend heading over to their website, geoscenics.co.uk, so you can try it out for yourself. Once you get to the checkout, just use the code MRG001 and the discount should automatically be applied. And you actually get a lot of material in the kit. I mean, I've done the entire yard on my layout and now the platform surface too, and I've still got plenty of it left over. So if you've got a large area to cover on your layout, this is going to work really well for you. And I have to admit, regardless of whether they're a sponsor or not, I'm really looking forward to using the pothole road kit again in the future and trying out some of the other Geoscenics products too on my other layouts. But like I said though, don't just take my word for it. Try it out for yourself and don't forget to use the code MRG001 to get a discount on the kit when you order it from their website. And thank you once again to Geoscenics for sponsoring this video. And with the platform surface in place, I can really start to focus on the details around Gofod Tynn now to really bring it to life. There are still a few little gaps on the layout, like this section here by the tunnel, where there's no scenery just because it's so vertical. So I'm going to add a large bush here just to fill this in. With some glue on the area, this bush I've made can be secured in place, and this is just made from lichen or lichen, sprayed brown and then covered in Woodland Scenics turf. This is really quite effective, and the good thing is that because the lichen is so springy, it isn't delicate, which means it's okay being on the outside of the layout like this where it may get knocked. On the other side of the portal, to cover this sliver of uncovered ground, I'm going to use fine leaf foliage. This is another great product from Woodland Scenics, which I really like using. It is a bit more expensive, but it does work very well. And I'll add more of this over the top of the tunnel mouth too, and you can see that this is a slightly different colour. The stuff on the side of the tunnel was the olive foliage, where this is the Woodland Scenics light green foliage instead. And I do think it's important to have a mixture of different colours so that all the plant life doesn't appear too similar. Now, small bits generally do fall off from the foliage, but I usually collect these up and I'll use these for weeds and ground cover around the yard. I'll just keep working and positioning it until I'm happy, sometimes adding a little bit more. Again, you can see I'm still using those two main colours, and I'll be switching back and forth between them during this whole process. On the side of the hill, I'm just going to add some larger clumps to add to the wild and overgrown grass in this area. I'm also going to use a little bit up by the rocks as well, and this works to fade out the effect from a more dense area. Around and between the rocks though, I'm mostly going to use clump foliage to fill in the gaps. Now this is a much thicker material, it's a lot less delicate and it's easy to pull apart and work with. Using it in tandem with the fine leaf foliage though can create some really interesting effects where you have a mixture of dense and thinner greenery. Like I said though, the clump foliage is much more durable and it can be really worked into the gaps. You'll notice I'm using a mixture of two colours again, and this time it's the light green and the medium green. And this is already starting to look really good, and it makes the harsh grey of the rock stand out so much more. Like I said, the fine leaf foliage is best for using around the edges where the undergrowth is getting a bit thinner and fading out. Clump foliage though works much better where you need to fill in lots of areas like this, and it covers up all the brown gaps between the rocks. And I'll tear off smaller chunks and strips too, just to really get this in between the rocks up top. I'm going to add more of this foliage right along the top of the hill too. Here I'm putting down a long line of PVA glue, and then clump foliage is added along this to create an unkept and natural hedge. Now this works very well as a small scenic break, which hides the join between the layout and the backscene. And yes, there's still a backscene to get to as well. Again, I'm switching up the colours, trying not to make it look too uniform, and on that subject, I don't want it to be completely a straight line either, so I'll add some extra clumps here and there. The smaller bits of the clump foliage can be added between the stones and grass just to blend these together more naturally too. Like with a lot of this layout build, I don't have a meticulously crafted plan here. I'm just filling up what seems right without trying to make it look too busy. And not forgetting the fine leaf foliage too, this is also added to certain areas, again using PVA. Sometimes I just find it's best to trim little bits off if you have the odd random bit that's sticking out in a strange way. Now in the yard, I want this to have a slightly weedy overgrown effect, so I put down some PVA glue in random spots. And then I just drop random bits of foliage in and see where it lands. I really don't want to do too much here, but I find that if you place it, it can look a bit forced. Much finer turf can also be used as well. And this looks a lot when it's initially dropped on, but it can be easily spread out or even clumped up. And of course, don't forget that the PVA glue will dry clear for any bits that aren't covered. I'm also adding a little bit between the tracks in certain areas too, just anywhere I think plants like these could push up through the ballast without being hit by trains. And when all is said and done, this is what the final result looks like. It's a real transformation for the layout, and now it looks a lot less stark and much more like a real living world. The rock face in particular looks fantastic with the clump foliage, and it gives the impression of the weeds and plant life growing around all the rocks in the cracks. So yeah, I'm over the moon with how all this has turned out, and with the foliage now added to the layout, I feel like we're on the home straight. So as you might be able to tell, I'm really happy with how that foliage has brought the layout to life. And of course, if you want to try something similar on your own layout, well, you're going to need a model railway retailer to get all the different bits you need. And personally, I recommend D-Rails, who are the other sponsor for today's video. And if you've seen any of the previous episodes in this series, you'll know I really don't have a bad word to say about them. They have a fantastic range, and it's not just limited to locos and track, but for example, all of the woodland, scenics, foliage and turf that I was just using in that last section was bought directly from D-Rails too. And you know how I'm a big fan of their free delivery. If your order is over £20, you automatically get access to the free delivery option. And even if your order is under that, their standard economy delivery is only like £2.99 or something, which I think is pretty good anyway. Their customer service is fantastic, their packaging is great too, which of course is very welcome when dealing with delicate models, and honestly, I wouldn't have them as a sponsor on this channel if I didn't use them myself. So head over to their website derails.co.uk to check out everything they have in stock and upcoming releases that you can pre-order from them too. Like I said, I really do think they're one of the best model railway retailers out there at the moment, and personally I really do recommend them. Thanks again to Derails for sponsoring this video and other episodes in the series, as it really has helped make this whole thing possible. Now though, let's head back to Gofod Tynn, because there's still one major thing missing from the layout. So one of the last things to be added to the layout is the buildings, and as you can see I have 3 of them here ready to be installed. A few weeks ago I made a video where I scratch built this station halt, and I made this specifically for Gofod Tynn, so this is going to live on the platform. I also have an engine shed that I built from a budget model railways kit. And finally, I've also put together a ground frame signal box built from a Wills kit, which I thought was absolutely perfect for a narrow gauge railway. You may also notice I've added custom running in boards to the front of this, and there will be more on those later on. Now I think it's important not to overcrowd the layout, but this is just enough to add a little bit of infrastructure. And they've all been painted in a similar colour scheme too, so they all work well together, and the green really fits in nicely with the layout and of course the new foliage. So the signal box is going to be installed here at one end of the yard, just behind the entrance into the sidings, as I felt like this was a really good place for it to go. Now all of the buildings actually have lights fitted into them too, so before installing this I'm going to drill a hole through the baseboard so that the wires can pass underneath. The sawdust is quickly cleared away, and then I can push the wires through the hole. So I'm happy with the position of the signal box, and all I'll do now is add super glue to where it was sat. The signal box was then pushed back down into position, and that's one building fitted to the layout. The engine shed was up next, and this is going to follow exactly the same process. This sits on the spur from the station loop, and you may remember way back in episode 1 I said I did want to have an engine shed here, so I'm really glad that this has worked out. Again, the wires are threaded through the hole, and with some glue on the underside of the building, the shed is fixed in place. Finally, I'll repeat this entire process for a 3rd time with the station building. Again, I'm really pleased with how the Geoscenics powders have worked here as a dusty platform surface, and with the colour of this building being a bit darker, that lighter platform surface almost acts as a replacement to the cream colour that the other buildings have. So, with all the buildings now installed on the layout, I just need to wire up the lights. It's been a while since we've been under here, but this is all the wiring that is below the layout. The first thing I'm going to do here is attach a buck converter to the underside. I use this to step down the power for all the LEDs on the layout in one go, rather than solder a resistor to each one, and as always there's a link to this and everything else I've been using today in the description. The wire from my lighting bus can then be connected up to the input of this. 2 wires can then be screwed into the terminals at the other end for the output. This is then what I've connected the LEDs to, and to achieve this I simply removed part of the plastic coating, wrapped the LED wires around the positive and the negative, and then used some solder to hold them together. And before you ask, I did add insulation tape over this afterwards, just to protect the joints from shorting each other out. So, does it all work? Let's switch the power on and see. And that is a fantastic result. Each of the buildings is lit up, and even in normal light it makes a really big difference. I'm especially pleased with the engine shed. The interior is usually quite dark, but with the lights on you just get a glimpse of the tram engine sitting inside. You don't always realise how much lighting can add to a layout until you see it like this, but I'm really happy, and to me it just makes the buildings feel much more lived in. And with some buildings finally on the layout, Gofod Tynn is really starting to feel more finished now. You may remember that the layout is booked to appear at the Spa Valley Railway later this month for their model railway weekend, which is really exciting, and I'm feeling pretty confident now that the layout is in a good enough state to display to the public. You guys know me though, I don't just want this layout to be good enough, I want it to be the best it can possibly be. So now it's really time to hone in on the details. And by the way, if you want to find out more info about the Spa Valley Railway exhibition so you can see the finished layout in person, along with some properly high standard layouts, well, head over to the website spavalleyrailway.co.uk. I'll be there all throughout the weekend, keeping Gofod Tynn running, so feel free to come and say hi if you'd like to, and enjoy what is shaping up to be a really good day out. In the meantime though, let's get some extra detail onto the layout. Just to add even more realism to the station, I've got some 3D printed parts made up by model railway scenes. First up is this tiny bin just to go next to the station, and despite it being really small, this was actually quite fun to paint up, and I'm really pleased with how the lettering turned out. Obviously this is a modern day bin, which is just a very subtle nod to the layout being set in the preservation era. Now further along the platform I've got a flower box that I've added some static grass to, and with a little bit of purple foam on the top just to represent flowers. It's a really simple technique, but it's very effective, and it just adds a nice little bit of colour to the station and the front of the layout. The most exciting bit to me though is this running in board with Gofod Tynn on it. These were customised for me by Model Railway Scenes, and it couldn't be easier to do. You literally just type in the name you want and they print it all out for you. And then I'll add another similar flower box to the other side of this, and all these details are just being held down with super glue. Finally, to finish off this scene, I've got a little bench just to add underneath the sign. I wasn't entirely sure what style to go for, so I went with a Great Western one since that seemed right for Wales. Now obviously most narrow gauge railways weren't part of the GWR, but again this is a preservation era layout, so I think we can suspend our disbelief. And with that added, the station has now been turned into a really nice little scene. From tiny details though, now let's move to one of the biggest things on a model railway. It's time to add a backscene. I'll be honest, I didn't really have anything to do with this, as my dad very kindly painted some hills onto a bit of hardboard, and you can see this is the result. I think the brief I gave him was Welsh Hills, which admittedly wasn't much to go on, but this works really well. Obviously the section you see at the bottom is hidden behind the landscape on the layout, but you can see there is also a large cutout too. Now this lines up perfectly with the fiddle yard as you can see here, so that I can always get access in there in case of emergency. And there's also a little slot here too, and that's just for the wire that provides power to everything on the layout. So let's put the back scene in place, and this is now what the layout looks like, and you can see it really makes a huge difference. Now I know some people like to use photographic back scenes, and I'm definitely not against that, but in this case I do think a simple representation of hills behind the layout is all that's really needed. The focus is really on the layout, and the back scene shouldn't draw too much attention other than just to extend the scene, and I think this does that really well. And you can see as well that the line of foliage I added along the back of the layout earlier on does a really good job of hiding the join between the layout and the back scene. It really just allows you to believe that the land slopes down on the other side of this hill off into the distance, and the back scene really does make the scene feel much more immersive. Now, this series has been all about building a layout to fit inside a suitcase, but you'd be forgiven for not realising that, seeing as we haven't seen much of the suitcase since episode 1. Well, now it's time to reunite the two, but before I do that, it's going to need a coat of paint. You may remember that the suitcase was originally in this rather bright yellow, which I wasn't overly keen on, so I've decided to paint it grey instead. I did consider other colours for this, green and maroon were both on the list, but I think the grey works well. After all, the layout is the main feature here, so I didn't want the suitcase to be too distracting, and I think the grey is a nice nod to the Welsh slate that these railways were built for. On the layout itself, the edges of the frame are also being painted black. Now, these won't really be seen, but the black will help it blend into the suitcase interior. And the same was also done to the foam board around the back of the layout too. And now that the paint has finished drying on the suitcase, you can see this is the finished result. I think this looks really great, and the grey works really well with the brown metal around the edges. Finally, it's time to combine the layout and the suitcase, so fingers crossed everyone, let's hope it fits. With a bit of help, I'm just using some ribbon to lower it down into the case, and as you can see, it fits pretty much perfectly. Now at the moment, Gofod Tynn is sitting right down inside the case. That was always the intention, as it gave me the freedom to have the large hill at the back, which you can see here fits inside the suitcase nicely when the lid is closed. When the layout is on display though, it can all be raised up, and this is done just by sitting it on top of a couple of wooden blocks in the bottom of the case. You can see the front of the layout sits just above the top of the case, so it's perfect for viewing and filming the layout, and then the back scene, which will normally be stored in the lid, can then just be put behind. I just think this is so cool. It's really great to see Gofod Tynn finally inside the suitcase, which was my original plan right from the start of this series, and I just think it's such a fantastic way to present a layout. So here we are, a 009 layout inside a suitcase, and it really is something, isn't it? For the last several weeks, this has been my life, and I'm so proud to have not only built my first 009 layout, but to have also followed through on the challenge of building a visually interesting model railway in such a small space. So I think the only way to celebrate the completion of this project is to run some trains. Although Gofod Tynn is a small layout in the grand scheme of things, I'm so pleased with not only the look of the layout, but the whole atmosphere. That, I find, is often the most important thing with a model railway, and to me, this really could be somewhere up at the top of Wales where a lesser known narrow gauge railway winds its way through the hills past a little station halt in the middle of nowhere. Coming from my ongoing 00 gauge layout, which is a much larger and more ambitious project, this has been a chance to go back to basics and do something more simple in a much shorter space of time. A few weeks ago, this was a blank baseboard ready to have track laid on it, and look at it now, a complete model railway with running trains, and I'm so proud of how it's turned out. And while this may be the end of the series, it certainly isn't the end of the line for Gofod Tynn. The layout will absolutely continue to feature on the channel, and don't forget you have a chance to come and see it in person at the Spa Valley Railway 2 for their model railway weekend in just a few weeks' time. Finally, I have to say a big thank you to all of you who have been watching along and following the progress of this layout. It's been an absolute pleasure to create this series for you, and it's fantastic to see you all taking such an interest in the project and tuning in every week. You can definitely expect more videos and series like this, and who knows, maybe I'll even build another 009 layout in the future. For now though, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye. Okay, and we are done. That is a wrap. Right, better get cracking on the modular layout now.